Hello. Um, Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Sam, and this is a sort of a test, really, pilot of trying to run a live event directly into my site. Now I've just realised I'm actually listening to myself in my own ear, so I'm going to take that off. There we go. That's better. Yeah, today I'm just going to do a run through of my online version of my Ghostsigns tour, and this is all really in the context of my new project, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a magazine all about sign painting. And I thought one of the things that I could start doing for subscribers to the magazine is to do online events, and obviously this one I'm making available free to everybody, but in future I think I might put these behind the subscriber wall and use it as a subscriber benefit. But today, because I'm not sure how this is going to work, I'm doing it live like this, and available for everybody. The format, I'm just going to sort of whiz between Google Street View and some pictures that I've got in a PowerPoint, and that's going to try to bring to life the in-person tours that I used to run in London. I still do when I go back to London. And the experience itself you can do as an online self-guided thing as well, but in a sense it's kind of more impulsive, and I will improvise and ad lib a little bit as we go along. There isn't a kind of direct interaction thing, but if you follow me at Ghostsigns on Twitter, then I'll keep an eye on that. Maybe, I don't know, at me or something on there if you've got kind of questions or comments, and I'll periodically look through those. And then if you are coming at this from Better Letters, it's probably more likely that you follow me on Instagram. So at Better Letters on Instagram is how you can find me. Most of what we see today, probably about 2/3 of it, can be found in this huge, great big book that I did with Roy Reed. It's just literally packed 200. Is it 200? I can never remember. Is it 250? No, it's 320 pages with over 250 ghost signs across London, each of them individually researched and their stories told. So if you want to go deep, get that book. Now, let's see if this is going to work. So we're going to do screen share, and I will go, yeah, just share the whole screen, because that way, let's just come out of that and I'll do it in book mode. So started. So yeah, so we're on the Stoke Newington Ghostsigns walk, and this, I think it will last about an hour, maybe a bit over, depends. And like I say, this is one of my online tours, so you can do it in your own time with me. Still got audio from me, but kind of at your own leisure, online, ghostsigns.co.uk/tours, where you'll also find my other ones in Bankside and Clapham. The Clapham one is free. This one normally, and the Bankside one, are charged at a £5. That's some of my social media stuff. So like I say, this is kind of me doing a tour for myself, because I am Ghostsigns and I am Blag Better Letters magazine. So so this is a trial event. But if you want to follow my Ghostsigns stuff, you got Instagram at Mr. Ghostsigns, Twitter at Ghostsigns, the website is ghostsigns.co.uk, and I have a sort of periodic Ghostsigns packed mailing list, and that's just ghostsigns.substack.com. So so go give a follow on some of those. There's the book. There is a page on my website, ghostsigns.co.uk/book, and that's got all the links to buy the book. It's 25 quid. You can get it in places like Tate Modern Bookshop. You know, all good bookshops should have it, and if your local bookshop doesn't have it, order it with the ISBN. We always want you to support the local bookshop rather than, let's say, major online retailers. But if you are on a major online retailer, make sure you leave a review. That's the most important thing to do there. So that's the book, and we will now jump. So this is how I'm going to do it. So look, I'm going to go now to, I'll hide these meeting controls because they get in my way. I'll go here, and this is where we're going to start. So this is Stoke Newington, Stamford Hill, sorry, looking north. And as you can see, it's kind of, we will be able to have this approximation of walking around the street. That's the station just there, and then that's looking south. If you keep walking all the way that way, you end up at London Bridge. So this is sort of the furthest north that we'll start. And what we're going to look at first is this wall up here, where you can see there is some ghost sign stuff and some graffiti in there, and I'll touch a little bit on that in a moment. So these are a couple of photographs taken about 10 years apart, in which you can see the one on the left, the words Army Club coming across the middle of the sign are much easier to see, and that's because that was a more recent sign that was painted over one for the Westminster Gazette. And as you can see on the left, Gazette is virtually invisible, but on the right, the more recent photo, that's gradually becoming a bit more visible as the Army Club sign fades. And this is 2 layers then on the same wall, and the word that I've borrowed it really from other people, and I just think it is quite a good word to describe this layering of signs, is palimpsest. Palimpsest, Palimpsest, and it comes from the study of old manuscripts where people would use the same vellum or parchment to write back and forth to each other, say. So I might receive a letter, I would scrape off the writing off that and write my own one, but I never completely got rid of what was underneath it, and over time layer upon layer of text would build up, and that's called a palimpsest, and it's something that we've borrowed in order to describe these old signs. Something worth noting on here, if you look above the word Westminster, you'll see a sort of slight, on the left picture especially, you'll see a slightly curved shape up there, particularly above the NSTE of Westminster. I'm just going to flick to this. So that's the sort of shape you're looking for from this 1925 advertisement for Army Club. So there used to be a pictorial on here of this character, their mascot, the Major, who was used in their branding and advertising particularly in the interwar years. And yeah, so he's gradually fading, and then this Westminster Gazette sign is becoming more visible. The dates, well, I would say the Army Club one is probably 1920s, and the fact that the Westminster Gazette went out of circulation in 1928, I think I'd probably put both of them in or around the 1920s. What's interesting with the Westminster Gazette one is that the person who painted it, the sign writer or sign painter, as they say in the States, had done this checkered border around the edges, and then had probably roughly chalked out where the Westminster letters were going to go and set out painting more or less freehand. And as they reached the letter T of Westminster, they had a panic when they realized that they had constrained themselves with this border and they were going to run out of space. So the MIN in the middle, you can see is horizontally compressed. That then gives them the breathing space to finish the work at the end. We'll see a sign a bit later on, probably the one they did the next day, where they've figured out that this is avoidable, and they sort it out. So there you have it. The other thing to say is that graffiti you see at the bottom was then whitewashed. So this photo on the right is after the whitewashing to try and get rid of the graffiti. But all that did was provide a brand new canvas for Elmo to come and paint on. And this is something that happens often, is that graffiti and ghost signs come into conflict. But what's interesting here is that the people who took that decision decided, yes, we're going to get rid of the graffiti, but we're going to leave the 1920s tobacco advertising up on the wall. And I think those decisions that people make about these are interesting. And in the book, it's something that we discuss. This idea of preservation and what has value and what should and shouldn't be conserved in the public realm. And I'll probably touch on that a little bit as we go along. So I'll zoom out of here. There used to be a sign that we would, on the walk, we'd kind of duck down this little alleyway by the side of the station because there used to be a sign up there. In fact, it's still here on the street view, but I'm not going to sort of dwell too much on stuff that's gone because that gets a bit boring. But what we used to do was come down the alleyway and finish up here on Cazenove Road. And as we turned, there's the alleyway, as we turned out of it, we'd come down here and you'd get hit by this this double whammy. You've got this one there, and in the far distance, that one there. So obviously the first one to look at is this one, and I think it might be better viewed in an earlier street view. Let me just take a step backwards because it's I think it is better viewed in one of the earlier street views. Let's try. Yeah, that one looks quite nice. April 2018. So it's this one here. Now, I just want to point out the positioning of it. So you can see that it's on the wall of the shop there that's now Tiffin Box, but it's adjacent to this kind of garages or what is actually a mews. It opens up inside into what were former stables, and that's something that I'll touch on when I talk through this sign. So there it is. That's the full wall. You can see some lettering arching over the top. Well, in fact, there's two bits on the arch at the top, one more visible than the other, and then it makes use of the height of the wall. So there's the top, and running across the top is Templeman, and Templeman and Co, in fact, is what it says. If you look above the double O of Cooper, you can see the ampersand and the C of and Co. Now, Templeman and Co was a cheesemongers, and they were based in the building that the sign is painted on from about 1885 to about 1895, so a 10-year stint there as cheesemongers. The Cooper one, oh, I've forgotten his name now. Is it James? I've forgotten his his name. I'm just going to check in the book. But it's but Cooper came in about 1905 and was what's known as a job master. Now, a job master, F. Cooper, Frank Cooper, that's it. A job master was a keeper of horses, carriages, and the rest of it, and they would make them available for hire. So there you can see the wording job master. And if we go back to this one, you can see wedding carriages. So Cooper would have made his horses and vehicles available for weddings, funerals, house moves, general transportation, and whatnot. And he actually lists a couple of the types of vehicles that he had on there: Landaus and Broughams. So Landaus and Broughams were horse-drawn carriages, and the main difference between them was that a Brougham had a fixed roof, whereas a Landau had here we have one, a convertible roof. So some people might want to show off on a sunny day, take the top down, and be getting pulled around Stoke Newington in one of Cooper's Landaus. The other things just to sort of point out on this with respect to the work is that most of the lettering lines are set out using the brick heights to determine the letter heights, and that's an obvious thing to do. You measure out your letters according to the heights of the bricks. You have a natural grid system set up for you there. setting the names on the arch is a sort of slight flourish, and then these two words, Landaus and Browns, are a sort of, they're kind of snaking across the wall, and some people would refer to that as the words being on the ribbon, or perhaps on the wave is another term for that. And right down the bottom, very, very faint, it says cabs, etc. Quite hard to make out, but the etc. is done in the form of an ampersand and a C, and this was the old way of writing etc. And it's logical, because an ampersand is the conjunction of an E and a T, the Latin for et and then cetera. So etc is ampersand C. It's exactly the same meaning. I don't know when the shift happened to people using etc more than ampersand C, but we do find this on a lot of ghost signs, the ampersand C form. So there you have Cooper and Templeman. It's not quite a palimpsest actually, because you haven't. Yes, you've got two different pieces of signage on the wall, but it hasn't got that overlapping aspect that I think is more typical of the palimpsest idea, let's say. All right, so remember I showed there were a couple on this street, so if we we'll kind of just dash down a little bit further and go over here, and let's see if there's a better time to look at this one. They're all a bit obscured by the lamppost. Oh, that one's not too bad. So up here, got it on there. So that's the next sign we'll look at. I'll flick back into my slides, and so there's a photograph of the sign. It was repointed. Have I got the date of that? I can't remember. It was when I was doing walking tours, probably about 2015. So that strip down the right side has been lost to repointing. And it was funny because the day that happened, someone I know who lives in the flats facing these messaged me somehow and said, oh, there's scaffolding up on the building. I said, okay, well, I was working from home, so I whizzed around the corner, went and talked to the workers that were putting up the scaffold. Oh, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we're painting the front and we're going to repoint this bit. And I asked if they were doing anything to the sign, and they said, oh, we don't think so, but talk to the owner. And so I got to meet the owner of the building, and I said, are you doing anything to tinker with the sign? He said, what sign? So the first thing, he hadn't really noticed it. I pointed it out to him and explained to him that that I led walking tours in the area looking at these things. And he said, oh, okay, yeah, so you want to put an advert up there for your walking tours? Okay, yeah, we can put a billboard or something up there. So he kind of didn't get that I wanted to actually show people that. So I explained a bit more. No, I'm interested in that actual sign and what it says and its meaning. And he then said, oh, I see. Well, maybe we could remove it from the wall for you brick by brick. So in a sense, he sort of tried to sell me it in two different ways. But I always kick myself because I never actually asked him for a price on the removing it brick by brick. I should have kept that conversation going just to have a bit more to this story. But anyway, it's still there, and that day we only lost that little strip down the right side. Now the sign itself, you can hopefully see quite clearly John Brown's Whiskies, but the slogan, which is running horizontally across the top, across two lines, is "Good judges drink." And this is a bit of a play on words, as you can see in the late Victorian advertisement on the right. Good judges drink only John Brown and Co.'s Scotch whiskies. And so it's a play on, judge of character, judge of quality, and then obviously the profession of judge. So there's two of them, hopefully after the court case, knocking back a couple of John Brown's whiskies. Now, what's kind of slightly interesting about this one is that it's the sign. So whereas the ones before we had Templeman was painted on the building that the actual cheesemongers was in, Cooper had paid, I guess, some kind of rental to use that wall to advertise his business, which was in the mews just in front. Whereas this one was on the premises of an off license, and coincidentally, that off license was also called John Brown. Now, I because of the slogan, I do think that this sign was actually advertising the whiskies, and that it was just a coincidence that the off license was also called the same name. And I haven't been able to find a connection between the whiskey brand and what was effectively a mini chain of John Brown off licenses in northeast London. So there's a bit of mystery to that, but this idea of a bigger brand placing their signage on a retailer where the brand is available is often known as a privilege. And this was a very common form of advertising. We'll see later, we'll see a baker's one on a bakery advertising the flour that they use to make their bread. Couple of things just to point out stylistically, whereas the Cooper one and the Temple one were just plain lettering on a wall, here there's a few embellishments. There's some drop shades, block shades on the lettering. It's painted onto a background which aids the contrast. It's got a sort of thin border around it which has got these lozenge, these sort of curved corners. So all of these little extras, and like the pictorial that we saw earlier for the Major on the Army Club one, all of these extra things added time to the job and therefore cost to the sign. And it's not surprising to find that the bigger companies like John Brown's Whiskies and like Army Club cigarettes could afford to add those types of embellishments. So we'll come back on the street. So good judges drink John Brown's whiskey. So now we're back onto the high street. So that was just a little detour. We're passing on our right here, Abney Park Cemetery, one of the 7 great Victorian cemeteries that were built on what were then the outskirts of London, because the graveyards in the city were overflowing, and then have since been kind of subsumed into the city itself. And we'll come to, I wanted to show that because there is then a small connection to the sign that we're about to look at here. So very, very simple little sign, again, on that side wall. And this again is advertising, like Templeman is advertising the business that was in the building itself. So we'll come back to the slides. So there's a couple of angles of it. R. Ellis, ironmonger, stove range and Bath boiler works, gas fitter, plumber, and general house repairs, established 60 years. Now, Robert Ellis, was born in Hackney in 1835, and him and his wife Sarah Elizabeth originally had their shop and house on the high street that we were just walking up and down. In 1878 they moved here, and I speculate that was to make a fresh break, because in their house and studio on the high street, they sadly lost 2 young sons, both under the age of 1 year old. In fact, one of them died, I think, at about 12 weeks old. They lost 2 sons in the space of a couple of years, and they were also living with Robert's brother, who happened to die around the same time. So they had these 3 deaths in quick succession, and very soon afterwards moved here, I think just to cleanse and to start again. So this was their new premises, and it's not clear when this sign went up, but what's interesting is the established 60 years line, because Robert himself died in 1898 when he was 63 years old, and he obviously didn't start doing his ironmongery as a 3-year-old. He may have inherited the business from somebody else, and so he could make that 60 years claim on the basis of continuity, or the sign might have been commissioned after his death, but while his wife continued running the business up until 1919. So he died 1898. I don't know which is the more likely of those. Maybe she felt there's some advertising needed to be done, but I feel like probably he was making a claim on the basis of taking over the business from whoever it was that trained him. Now, it's worth bearing in mind, like I said, this used to be on the outskirts of London. When that train line opened that we walked past earlier, there was a huge explosion in the population of the area between about 1870 and 1900. The area, I think, roughly tripled in size in that period, and that involved a building boom. Lots of the streets that were laid out in the area happened at that time, and so there was lots of work for people like Robert Ellis. The sign itself is possible he might have painted it himself. I don't know. He doesn't put any kind of painter decorator works, but he does put general house repairs. But there is a tendency a lot among some of these older tradespeople to really do lots of different things, and it's not uncommon to find signs that advertise plumbing, glazing, and decorating, and even sign writing on them. So he probably had some basic skills in painter decorating, or had somebody that he worked with that did that kind of work. So it's possible that he did the sign himself. It's set on a border. It's using that technique of laying out your letters according to the mortar lines, but then it also has these what we call scalloped corners. So these are these kind of cut in quarter circles in each corner, and it's interesting to see those on a painted wall sign, because the origins are actually a more functional thing, which is this. If you've got a sign and you're going to put some kind of border around it, you want to avoid the screws or the rivets or whatever are being used to fit the sign going through and messing up your border. And so these scalloped corners gave you a neat way of keeping everything clear of the sign itself. So they were initially serving that purpose, but then became decorative, or actually it's more appealing than a hard right angled corner, and so started to be used decoratively, and is a very it's a very traditional aesthetic now for if you want to have a sign that looks kind of a bit older or a bit more vintage, you can use those scalloped corners as a graphic device. So why was it on here? Well, it could have been to be decorative in that sense, or it could have been there to give the illusion of perhaps a more expensive mounted signboard. It's not clear, but I always like to think that it was a kind of decorative thing. Last point to make about Robert Ellis was that he eventually, after he died in 1898, was buried in Abney Park Cemetery that we just passed, and about 21 years later was joined by his wife, and that's their headstone, which has a little monogram on the top, R&EE, Robert and Elizabeth Ellis. So rest in peace, Robert. So then we're back on the street. There did used to be one, if you just see this sort of yellow patch of wall on the left there, we're seeing it because we're in Google Street View. That's since been, I think, cleaned, maybe sandblasted off. So I did used to stop there and talk a bit about that. It's quite fun because the door went in after the sign, and so it was incomplete. But I won't dwell on that today, because so we'll just we'll come up here. So we're back onto the high street, and this is, why don't we stop here? I'm just going to do this very quickly. I don't have this in my slideshow, but here you can see a shop front for Barry's Biscuits, and you think, oh, that sounds nice, and but it turns out it's completely fake. There's never been, never will be, at least here, a Barry's Biscuits. And I've got an article in the next issue of the magazine, which is coming out towards the end of the month. I've got an article about the collective that have been doing these kind of faux shop fronts all around Hackney and North London, and they're called "This Is My Costume," and this is one of a handful in Stoke Newington. And what's quite fun about it is if you go on Google Maps, there's actually a pin on there for Barry's Biscuits, and it's been given a 5-star rating and a review. The review's bizarre, but anyway, so if you want to find out more about that, definitely get yourself a copy of the next issue of Blag Better Letters magazine. I should just say, if you do want to just get the email, free email subscription, just go to bl.ag, which is where the free email sign up is. I'm going to stop here. Now, this is interesting because it's actually ceramic, so it's tile work, rather than a sign painted directly onto the brickwork, say, as most of the ghost signs are. Now, you can have a big debate about what is a ghost sign. The definition that I've kind of got to is fading painted signs. This probably was painted originally before being fired onto the ceramics, so you could argue that it is a fading painted sign. So yeah, maybe it is a ghost sign. I don't know. I tend to think that ghost signs are normally on brick or wood, but I suppose it's unusual that it's fading on ceramic, because normally ceramic is very enduring. It's why you find it used a lot in Spain and Portugal and places that get proportionally more sun, because it lasts longer in those sunny conditions, because ultimately it's the sun that does cause the fading and the aging. So this one has faded, and I'll show you. Well, okay, let's so the pub, it's a pub for Jolly Butchers, and was opened in 1826. And here's just a few pictures that show it over the years with that sign in situ. You can see that it was a Truman Hanbury pub. That's probably one of the better resolution ones. That one's undated. Then you can see at some point it was covered by a billboard. It's possible that the way that was mounted may have caused some of the damage when it was removed, but it has been fading notably in the last 10 years. So it feels like actually the fade is more what's happening. So there it is, set in this lovely border, egg and dart border, I think it is. And along the bottom, it has this lettering that reads, "The Duchess of Devonshire canvassing the Jolly Butchers for their votes for Fox." Now this references the general election of, get my dates right, 1784, when William Pitt the Younger was up against Charles James Fox. Now, Charles James Fox was a man of questionable virtue. He was a gambler, womanizer, drinker. And there was a member of the aristocracy, quite unusually in that time, Georgina Cavendish, lent her support to Fox. Now, it was the way that she did so that courted controversy, or the alleged way that she did so. So she was reputed to have been giving a sort of kisses for votes campaign, and one of the key voting contingent cohorts were the Butchers of Westminster, and she was apparently around there flirting and cavorting with the Butchers of Westminster in order to get them to vote for Fox. So the Duchess of Devonshire canvassing the Jolly Butchers for their votes for Fox. Now, it's not clear if the Jolly Butchers were jolly before she turned up, or whether her activities are what made them jolly. But anyway, that's the sort of the theme of this, and probably where the pub takes its name from. So there's the panel there. Now, whether she actually did any of this is up for debate, but what's clear, it could have been used just to tarnish her name, but what did happen were a whole load of cartoons and caricatures and the rest of it. You know, here she is with her hand suggestingly positioned under the butcher's apron. So these kind of things were doing the rounds to besmirch her, and it stuck. So there you have it. So still there, you can still see it, but like I say, it is fading. Oops, oh dear, go back in. There we go, get back down to street level. That went zooming out. There is actually just down here, just have a quick look at it. There's this fading shop front here for Eloma preparations. This was a pharmaceutical outlet in, I think it's the 1940s, and yeah, 1940s until about the 1980s. So that's Eloma preparations. So back onto the high street, and we come up here. So we're continuing our journey south. Eventually we're going to come back. That's Church Street. We'll come back there for the sort of finale of the walk. I'm just going to show, have I overshot it? I have. Just going to show you now, what's it called these days? This is not that one. I think it must be. Okay, so there it's called Lemon Monkey. I can't remember what the shop is called these days, but inside that building, so it's next door to Ivory, inside that building is a lovely piece of Victorian glasswork, and I'm just going to show it to you. You can't see it on Street View because it's inside the shop, but this used to be set above an entranceway that receded back from the main street. So it did used to be strictly an exterior sign, albeit protected under the overhang on that setback entranceway. That was then built out to get more floor space in the shop, presumably, and the sign left alone. And owner after owner has sort of kept it in situ, and that business has changed at least 2 or 3 times since I've been doing these walks. But there it is, W.A. Higgs, in this very, very ornate Tuscan lettering style. The Tuscans have these, they're called bi or trifurcations, these sort of curly fishtails at the ends of the letters. And we normally would associate those with, say, you know, fairgrounds and circuses, but they were very, very popular in the late Victorian era, particularly on these what are called reverse glass signs. So in this case, the sign is on glass, but it's actually, all of it is produced and gilded and painted on the back of the glass. So we're looking through a thin pane of glass at the work that's on the back, and this requires you to work in reverse. So you have to do everything that's your foreground first and then work your way backwards before finally backing up the whole thing in black. It's got some lovely blends on the letters, as you can see there. These lovely sort of little holes in the middle of the letters. It's just a really nice piece of work. The business itself was a tea merchants, and they were there 1882 until 1926. And yes, there is, you know, you can see some bits of damage on the letters, but by and large it's in pretty good condition, and that's for 2 main reasons. One is that it's sitting behind that pane of glass, and the second is that it at some point moved indoors where it's not exposed to the same kind of moisture, humidity and sun and the rest of it that exterior signs are. So that's W. Higgs. Let's go back onto the street. So these are kind of sort of a couple of incidentals really, rather than full-fledged stops. We'll just go here. So this is Stoke Newington Bookshop, where you can buy my book. So you go in there, ask for Ghostsigns: A London Story by Sam Roberts and Roy Reid, and if you're lucky, you'll get a signed copy, because every time I pass by there, I sign a load. I was last there in August, and she said, here's a big load to sign, and that should keep her going until Christmas. So if you're looking for a Christmas present, for yourself or for anyone else, pop into there and buy one. Now, what we're going to look at just quickly here is above the current signage, this bit of stone there. I'll come back out and I'll show you what's going on there. What it has are these remains of letters and the screw holes that we use to fit them. The full wording is Barclays Bank Limited, and what happened here is that probably brass letters were mounted onto the stone. Over the years, the stone was dirtied, but the brass letters kept the bits underneath them clean. When those letters were removed for an update to the sign, those clean bits echoed the shape of the letters themselves. And this photo from 1955 shows them as they used to be on the frontage there. So that's Barclays. The building itself, as Barclays Bank, was bombed by an anarchist group called the Angry Brigade. I think it was because Barclays were invested in apartheid South Africa, and so they were a target, or it could have just been a more general anti-capitalist move. Now, going to look at this wall. See that up there? It's quite interesting. We'll come back. We'll come in here. So that's the wall there in 1910. Again in 1907. It's a bit earlier. Nothing on it. And here in, I think this is about 19, I haven't got the date on this. I believe it's late 1960s, possibly 1970 in fact. And you can see the full sign there, Dyson's, noted for provisions and groceries. And this was the business of Frank Charles Dyson. And he was a tea dealer, a provision merchant, grocers, effectively a grocery store. And in 1965, the business was taken over by Key Markets that you can see occupying the premises there. But they didn't take the signage down. This was the view in 2008, and you can actually see that this is a palimpsest. If you look over at the bit where it says provisions, running through that is it butter? Yeah, butter and tea. And so that Dyson had at least 2 layers of signage painted on there, and you can see the FC Frank Charles above the word Dyson. But what's noteworthy here is the graffiti on the wall, and that was causing some concern to the owners who were trying to sell the property, and so they decided to paint over it. So they gave it this, call it a blue rinse, and well, they missed a bit for starters. They could have double coated, because already the groceries line and is starting to show through. But probably the biggest abomination on this is that somebody somewhere found this bit of black paint lying around and said, oh, let's put that Dyson word back on there. And you know, I wouldn't even give it the honor of calling it a restoration, but they decided to paint the Dyson wording again, and it throws up the whole question of, should we repaint Ghostsigns or restore Ghostsigns? I generally prefer the faded originals, what first got me into it, but I accept that people do want to do that, and I don't really lobby to not do it as such. I suppose what I always caution is, if you're going to, then go back to these old photos, find them, dig them out, and try to do something that's at least an authentic effort to replicate the original. So I on the walks, I used to get a bit more wound up about that one and have to walk on. So let's do that. So we go here. So you can see this building above Kodak Express is relatively new. So the wall, that top bit of that wall, used to be much more visible. It wasn't so tucked down the alley. So that's what we're looking at here, that panel there. Now the first thing to point out about this is that there's a render been applied to the wall, which has provided a flatter surface for sign writing. It's then a palimpsest, so hopefully, particularly near the bottom, you can really see the different layers of that palimpsest overlapping, and the older one becoming more visible as the newer one fades away. John Hawkins and Sons is probably the most prevalent. The business was there. They were cotton spinners and manufacturers from Preston, and they were here from 1926 until just before the Second World War, about 1939. The building was then taken over by Steeles, who were the plate and sheet glass merchants and manufacturers. And I'm going to show you the layers. So Roy Reed, who I wrote the book with, does this wonderful work. He calls them reconstructions, where he recreates the artwork of the signs and then overlays that back onto his photography. So I think actually this might be my photograph, but he's applied that technique to it. So that just shows you where the John Hawkins and Sons stuff is. Yeah, so that gives you a sense of where what that layer consists of. And then the Steeles layer looks like this. So again, the Steeles is sort of the hardest word to see, but if you look carefully, you can just about make out the S, and then from that you can kind of intuit the rest. But that's how the Steeles sign was laid out. Couple of details on that one. You've got these old school phone numbers, phone CLIS 1122/3 and CLI 2000. Now CLI was the Clissold exchange, and so CLI, I think, let's get this right, is 254, I think, on your phone. And that corresponds with a lot of phone numbers in that area. I'm pretty sure that the CLIS, the S is just plural, so it's Clissolds, because there's two numbers given underneath, 1122/3. So 1122 or 1123 were the two numbers. So it's Clissolds 1122 and 1123, and Clissold 2000. So that's what's going on there. And what's most visible actually on those letters is just this block shade. So the actual faces of the letters have almost faded to nothing, and you've just got this this block shade revealing their forms. On the right is a detail of the bottom left corner. So if we go back, bottom left corner of the sign was actually signed by the sign writer that did it, which was William Cheney. And Cheney was interesting because he was operating in de Beauvoir, which is a bit further south from here. But it seemed, from what I've been able to find out, to be quite a cluster of sign firms in that area. Other companies that have traded in that area include Ambridge Signs, and there's another one called Silver Signs that were on Buckingham Road. So this area around de Beauvoir did seem to be a bit of a centre for sign writing, and that's where Cheney was originally. So he painted the Steeles sign in about 1940. We will whiz down here. So this is about as far south as I'm going to go on the trip, but it's just a lovely palimpsest. So this one here, really prominent. Interesting to note that ones like this one, the one we were just looking at, are south facing, which means that north facing, which means that they get less sun, which helps them to survive. But they are also now effectively useless because they face the wrong way. The street is now one way. So they were, when the street was two way, they would have been much more effective as advertising. But now with the street as a one way street, I'm skipping that stock because conscious of time and I want to focus on the best pieces. So this is it, Cakebread Roby & Co. It's made up of these 3 horizontal panels and then these big square ones or squarish ones left and right. All of them have got these scalloped corners that we looked at earlier. And at least on the right hand panel, there are at least 3 different layers on there, all for the same firm. And what was happening was that as the firm expanded and was offering more and more products and services, they had to shrink the size of the letters that they were using in order to accommodate the additional products and services on the walls. The business was here from 1882 to 1965. Although in 1914 their main manufacturing base moved up to Wood Green. This is a bit of a detail of the left panel, so you can see that the older layer, lead, glass, oil, colours and varnishes. They then wanted to add stained glass windows, leaded lights to those services, so all the letters had to shrink. And what's going on here is that the white paint that they used to white out the older sign was probably a kind of relatively cheap paint, and that's what is largely fading to reveal the older layer beneath. The actual it's probably red lead paint that they used for the lettering is holding up very well, but it's the white that they've used, you know, possibly a cheap whitewash that's fading to reveal the layers below. This is a photograph of the sign at night when project. Well, it's the work of Craig Winslow. So he has this thing called light capsules, and it's a way of kind of bringing ghost signs back to life, but without having to do that repainting. And so what he does is similar to Roy with the reconstructions, is he analyzes the sign, recreates the graphics, and then uses projection technology to beam that back onto the wall exactly aligned to the positioning of the original sign. And what's really great about that with a palimpsest, if you were repainting it, you would have to choose one of the layers to repaint. Whereas what Craig does is he's able to dance between the layers. He can show, here's layer 1, here's layer 2, here's layer 3, and here's them all overlaid. So he can tease apart the different layers and show them as part of his light capsules. So this was one of the ones that we did for the London Design Festival in 2016. We did a series of 5, I think, or 6 light capsules for that event, and this was one of the ones in Stoke Newington. That's another one that we did in South London, and that's on my Bankside Ghost Signs walk. I'm going to have a short commercial interruption of myself, so I'm going to take my Ghost Signs hat off for a moment and put my Better Letters hat on. So from my interest in ghost signs, I started to get really interested in contemporary practice of sign writing, or sign painting as they have in the US. And this has resulted in a whole load of things, taking on commissions, organizing workshops, making short films. And the most recent manifestation is what I was showing earlier. It's a print and online magazine that is just all about sign. I call it Adventures in Sign Painting. It's a very internationally focused publication, trying to celebrate nice work that's happening and interesting stories connected to signs and sign painting. So the URL is bl.ag, and that's where you can sign up to the free email mailing list. So that's free. You can then take out paid subscriptions, and there's a sort of membership level called Blagger. And what that allows you to do is to receive the print magazine twice a year. So issue 1 is sort of nearly run out. New subscribers will still get issue 1 for a period, and I'm just finishing up issue 2, which goes to print next week, which is exciting. So these are some of the pieces. This was a piece of work on a ceiling in Panama, which I thought was interesting in terms of the challenges that the people had producing that. This was pair of sign painters in France that went and worked for about 4 or 5 months on the set of Wes Anderson's French Dispatch film, just painting signs for the film, effectively set design, including this fake one for Absinthe, and then other fun stuff that's in the magazine. So and of course, because it's my magazine, I like to have Ghost Sign Corner, which every issue looks at a particular ghost sign. And this column that I came up with the idea of is Ye Old Sign Shop, where I try to tell the story of an old sign firm of some description. The next issue's got a fantastic one. This it's a gilded fascia. There's an Art Nouveau painting, other bits of glasswork, for a mosaic floor sign for the Hamlin firm in Devon, and I've managed to investigate the story of that and found out about there was a sign writing competition, and the guy that ran that shop was one of the winners of that competition. So that's coming in issue 2. Okay, let's get back onto the street. So we're going to go, we've just done that. So that was my little commercial interruption, little plug for Blag Better Letters magazine. So yeah, go over to bl.ag, sign up to the email list, and every month you will get a download of all sorts of sign painting goodness. In fact, the email newsletter also has a Ghost Signs Corner feature. So every email you get will always have a Ghost Signs story, and they tend not to be ones that I've published on my website. They tend to be exclusive to the magazine. I'm going to look very quickly at this wall. As you can see, it's got a sort of modern piece of work on it. I just want to quickly whiz through what happened there. So it was always a wall for advertising, not always a wall, but had historically been used for advertising. This photograph is part of a fundraising event during the First World War, and there it's advertising a local publication. This, you just see a very tiny glimpse of it. You can see that the wall was covered by a billboard, and this was quite common. Billboards would obviously be put on walls where there used to be advertising, because the need is the same. You want a place that's very visible, high footfall, and so on. So as billboards began to take over painted signs, they would be used on the same walls. So that was it as a billboard. And then this is what I remember it as. This sign was painted in the 1950s, and we're not sure. We think it was for some kind of tonic wine, and there is another one with the same wine glass illustration in Holloway, with the slogan "For a good glass of wine." It remains a mystery. Some people said, oh God, what were they called? I can't remember the names of the tonic wines. There's is it Stanley? And then I can't remember them. But anyway, if anybody knows the particular brand, I'd love to find out. That's how it looked up until about 2009, and it included the sign firm's name. So this was Willing Advertising. They were a big outdoor advertising contractor, and they were responsible for this site and this advertisement. And at the History of Advertising Trust, they have this, it's a whole kind of booklet, promotional booklet, but it's got examples of different sign formats that they would have been responsible for, including the fast-growing neon and electrical signs. So yeah, the council sort of blackwashed the wall in 2009, part of an anti-graffiti drive. I think it had something to do with the Olympics as well, trying to clean up Hackney ahead of the Olympics. And because it faces a school, the Parent Teacher Association decided, we should do something, we should put something on that wall. So they had this whole project where they worked with poets. I went and gave a talk about ghost signs to the kids, and that resulted in this heritage mural, which was which is a poem, and it was painted by they don't exist anymore, but Bread Collective. And so that's what's on the wall now, but under there somewhere is still that wine glass. If we shoot along, we'll look at this one briefly. This is almost impossible. Hopefully you can just see here this sort of bit. There's part of this sign has been lost on the right side, but there's just these fragments of lettering teasing. And this is another answers on a postcard one. So there's a photo of it from sort of closer up. So you just get these hints, suggestions of letters and words. That's what I've managed to figure out. Nothing, ampersand, G, I think, ACR, I think, agent for. So agent for normally is used where you've got a retailer of some description where you can definitely get access to the legitimate brands. So like an Apple authorized dealership. So agent for, possibly WHARS, this would be some kind of brand, I would have thought. Pantechnicons, we'll see a picture of one of those in a minute. Covered vans, and then a couple of other lines I've got no idea of. So there was clearly some kind of transportation business here. That's a Pantechnicon. And that's I don't know anything else. So the directories, so a lot of my research I do is looking at street directories. And there's been all manner of businesses here. The closest I think to what it could have been was an antiques dealer. There was an antique dealer there at some point, but the name doesn't match any of the letters that I've managed to identify near the top. So a mystery. You can't solve all of them. It would be boring if they were just all immediately apparent. So it's nice to have a bit of the thrill of the chase. So we'll look at this one. This is, let's just take a step back, because actually this one is visible from all the way up the street, especially in winter when the trees are not in leaf. So that's what we're looking at. It's another incomplete one, like the one we just saw with a bit missing, and this will explain why. So there it is. And here is an older Google Street View, and you can see that this Thai restaurant that used to be in the building next door were given permission to put up a signboard. Now what that did was cover a part of the painted sign that was there. While that signboard was up, the wall got cleaned. So you can see here that signboard is protecting what's underneath it, while the little bit to the left got cleaned away. The lettering was immediately apparent to me as Darren, because I did in 2009-10 a big national archiving project for the History of Advertising Trust. So this is one of the photos that was submitted for that down in South London, and there's another one also in South London. And so when this was revealed in, I think, about 2011 or 12, I knew straight away that it was a Darren sign. And this is a great example of a privilege. So what you've got here is the bakery was William Smith Hursley. So that's what it's, Hursley's is the bakery. So that was based in that building from about there was a bakery before, but he took it over in about 1890, and it traded there until about 1940. And what Darren did was say, look, you use our flour, we'll pay for a sign on your wall, but it's going to have our name on it really big. Now Hursley wins because it gives him signage that helps him to compete with other local businesses, and Darren wins because it's getting their name out there and in the presence of a trusted member of the community in the form of this baker. So that was how the privileges work. And if you think of modern examples, newsagents great modern example where you'll have, you know, John Smith newsagent, and that might be flanked by Mars bar logos, or you know, Daily Mirror newspaper logos. So those are just modern forms of privilege signs. This one is actually fading quite rapidly, so it doesn't look as crisp as that anymore. There you can actually see it's really starting to go quite badly. That's the photograph from August this year. So we'll just we'll continue on down Church Street. I think we should be okay for time. I reckon it's going to finish at about 20 past, something like that. I think I said quarter past on my general notification, but I think we'll end up a bit after that. Once I get talking about ghost signs, I tend to find it quite hard to shut up. So this one is perhaps slightly unusual, actually, in that it's facing out onto the street. You'll have noticed that nearly everything we've seen so far has been perpendicular to the street, so that as you're walking along, it's there coming at you. You can see the obvious benefit of that. This one doesn't follow that pattern, not because they didn't want to, but because that wasn't a wall that they had available to them. So we'll go and have a look at that a bit more closely. Again, this is another one that's fading quite a lot. The top right corner, top right sort of quarter, sorry, says leather goods manufacturer, and over on the left is Alf the Purse King, which was the trading name, the sort of the man bags of their day, in quite small letters REG, meaning that although it traded as Alf the Purse King, the registered REG, registered business name was A. Rubenstein and Sons, and they were responsible for making purses, pouches, handbags, wallets, etc. And we've got that ampersand C form of etc. there in the orange, and then underneath that it says also at 8 Kimberley Terrace, Great Yarmouth. Now, the business itself was that of Alf or Alfred Rubenstein. Now, his birth name was Abraham, but he changed it to Alf/Alfred in order to better assimilate into his adopted home of London. He was the son of Jewish immigrants that came to London in the I think about in the 1870s or so. I've got a full history of him that myself and Faith Carpenter wrote up. But he and I think his father started a leather goods stall in Petticoat Lane, and they had manufacturing set up here in Stoke Newington. In fact, it was next door to begin with, and then here for a few years in the mid 1920s. The business did very well. It expanded. It had places in Brighton, Luton, a few other branches in London, and like I said before, Great Yarmouth. What's quite interesting though about it is that it was painted in the 1920s, but this 1942 photograph doesn't show it. And there's then sort of photos from the 80s that show, have I got one of those? No, I don't, where it's actually less visible than it is today. And I've speculated that it could be that it was at some point whitewashed, and that then the whitewash faded in order to reveal the sign beneath. It's a phenomenon that I have seen in other locations, and I think it is probably quite likely. I can't think of another decent explanation of why a sign would become more visible over time unless it had something painted over it at some point. There is Alf himself, the guy in the center with the I don't know what flowers on his head or something. This is at the Great Yarmouth shop in the mid 1920s, and just a fantastic picture. He was obviously a real colourful character, and he's got this "No profiteering" slogan on there, which is lovely to see. And then I think, yeah, there's some of his children there, and interestingly, his family continued to run the business right up into in Great Yarmouth, right into the 2000s. There is Esther and Samuel. It was Samuel on the far right who was the last one to be running the business in Great Yarmouth into the 2000s. Just to give you a sense, this is the spread from our book for Alf the Purse King. So, you know, all of these signs that you're seeing have their stories told in the book, and this is from the dressing the city chapter. So the book is set up as, you know, building the city, furnishing the city, dressing the city, feeding the city, as a way of categorizing the signs. And there is the actual spread in print. So that's Alf. Right. Let's whiz on a bit further down Church Street. Yeah, so this wall nearly always has this this shadow being cast on it. So this building is fantastic. You can see it's got this fountain pen sign on the front and this big block of signage on the side, which is actually a triple palimpsest. And I'll do the palimpsest first, and I'll do the fountain pens one next. But the fountain pens one was actually the very first sign that I noticed, and what got me into this. And it's quite nice to have it on this walk, which was my original, my first ever Ghost Signs tour. So the 3 layers of this palimpsest. Well, we got the Westminster Gazette again. Now, if you remember earlier, we saw that the spacing was a mess on that. Well, here, assuming it was the same person, they've corrected that and figured out how to line it up and not have to squash their letters in the middle. There's then a layer for criterion matches, which I think is actually the most recent layer, but I'm just showing it because it's the most visible. And that big sort of box in the middle is a matchbox with the match heads pointing out. So those sort of rust-colored balls off to the right are the match heads. And then perhaps the hardest to see is Gillette, and the G, the big G of Gillette, is straddling the C and R of criterion and the M of matches. So yeah, so a triple palimpsest, and there may be more because there is this kind of yellow color towards the top of the wall, and I feel like there could be some other signage in there, but I've never been able to decipher that. The Gillette Criterion palimpsest, so those 2 brands on the same wall, can also be seen in Kilburn on the left here, and the one on the right used to be in Southwark. It's now been sandblasted to oblivion, so that's gone. But these walls were probably managed by a brokerage firm who would lease the walls to these advertisers and their agencies. There's a history of one of these called the Borough Bill Posting Company in our book. So there's the view in 1920s where you can see the Westminster Gazette sign nice and fresh. You know, more or less contemporary view, just showing that even into the 1920s there was still a kind of rural dynamic to Stoke Newington, with sheep and cows wandering up and down. Then these broker firms would convert the use of the wall from being painted signs to billboards. So here, 1942, you've got billboards covering that portion of the wall and in fact protecting the paintwork underneath. So billboards have this sort of double-edged sword in that, yes, they make the signs invisible for a period, but they are also preserving them. So depends which side you prefer to see. Yeah, I would prefer to see the original signs and have them fade gracefully, but they are at least preserving the signs, the billboards. This was another one of the light capsules that I helped Craig Winslow with in London, and a brilliant way of showing the power of his technique when it comes to palimpsests, because he was able to project all 3 graphics onto the wall, so you sort of get a sense of that layer upon layer. And then these lovely photos by Carol J. Moore were each of those individual layers. So the Gillette one, that Westminster Gazette one that we pretty much saw, and there's the Criterion matches with the Matchbox pictorial. So we'll just come round to the front. So here we go. Probably not my all-time favorite, but probably number 2 on the list, maybe, certainly of London, and probably the one that I sort of have more of an emotional connection to, in that it was the first I ever noticed. So it's a privilege. Walker Brothers were the stationers here, so they took the business over in 1924, and they were there until 41. And they have a privilege on their sign for Waterman's Ideal Fountain Pen. Now, Waterman's is still in business, but they stopped marketing this ideal fountain pen. Their marketing became more generic after about 1927-28. And so that helps to date the first iteration of this sign to the mid-1920s. The bit on the left, Fountain Pens Repaired, was actually an amendment to the original. You can see very faintly behind that, I think it says "We repair fountain pens," or there was something behind that then was overpainted. And the lettering on it looks a little bit rough around the edges, and that's because it was then given a white outline. And so when you're going to put an outline on something, you don't have to worry too much about perfect letter shapes, because you're going to cut in and finish them with the outline. In fact, that photo there, if you look carefully over to the right, you can see those white outlines. So the black didn't need to be absolutely perfect, but what's happened since is that the white has faded, leaving just the remains of the black. Why did they make that change? I don't know. I wonder, because it's got the line "any make" on it. I wonder if they sort of wanted to make a bit more of a show of the fact that they didn't just do Waterman's pens, and that the amend was in some way directed towards that intent. This is one of 2 signs in Hackney that are locally listed. So that means that the council has recognised it for its aesthetic and artistic merit and historical significance. So the Hackney Society proposed, I think, about a dozen Hackney ghost signs for listing, and this one and another one for Bloom's Pianos by the Museum of the Home, formerly the Jeffrey Museum, are the 2 that are given listed status, and both of them have that story explained in our book. So it doesn't give it a huge amount of protection. The owner could suggest changes that are so beneficial that it's worth getting rid of the sign, but luckily Errol, who owns the building, he loves the sign, doesn't want to do anything to it. And there are the Walker brothers themselves, Frank and Herbert. They were the 2 responsible for that shop and the sign. And there's its page from our book. Right, what have we got? A couple more, and then we'll be all wrapped up. So, okay, just have a look at this view. Okay, so that's a view down Church Street, 2022. That's approximately the same view over 130 years ago in 1890. And you can see I've circled that sort of patch of wall where you can see just a couple of letters in this old photo. And I've done that just to sort of point out that maybe what's most interesting about this sign is how old it is. Don't think we actually included this sign in the book. It's not actually that impressive as a sign in and of itself. So that's what we're looking at there. Okay, so I'll come back into here. So there it is, It's a J by that drain pipe over on the left. J Crane, house decorator, plumber, gas and hot water fitter, contractor for general repair. So he was contemporary to Robert Ellis that we met earlier, and benefiting from the building boom that was happening in this area in that late Victorian period. You'll have noticed on the street view that there's this sort of white outline bubble graffiti over to the right. My bet is that that will be outlived by the sign yet again, because here you can see a previous piece of graffiti in more or less the same place that has failed to outlive the sign. So it's not new. You know, this conflict between ghost signs and graffiti is quite common. And you know, I think there are some in the graffiti community who have a deference to the ghost signs, whereas others take a much more I don't care attitude. But these conflicts tend to be won out by the ghost signs at the end of it all, because the paints are that much better quality. And on the facing corner, this chamfer or splay is another one. So just zoom out of that, come into here. So there it is on the left. It's another one that's quite difficult to make out, but on this one it has been possible to pinpoint the business. It's oils sold at D's stores and warranted, something something something, white lead, which is a type of paint, and then some other text that I've never been able to make out. The business was started by what's his name? George D, I think. I haven't got the note, but anyway, so D started this shop in 1891, and he actually had another one on Church Street and one in Clapton that was run by his brother. And he got into this all originally as an ostrich feather dyer. So he was a colourman. So colourmen were people who sold paints and other you know, kind of, you get all sorts of things like brushes and you know, buckets and all of this stuff for doing household repairs and work. But yeah, so he got into it through the dyeing of ostrich feathers, and was actually a bit of a man about town. He was captain of the cycling club. He was a councillor on an independent ticket until his death in 1924 from influenza. And yeah, he had this shop. Now, after he died, the shop was taken over. I think he passed it on in his will to some of the employees there. And it was run in the mid to late 1950s by a guy called Robert Smith. And as you can see, the photograph on the right, 1955, the sign is not present on the wall. There's actually a mounted sign board. And so at some point after that, it looks like the signboard came down and the painted sign was put up directly on the brickwork. And so it's yeah, I mean, it's not a very modern creation, but yeah, 1950s is relatively recent when it comes to ghost signs. So we'll do we'll now go, that's our last sort of formal ghost sign. Just do another incidental. Here's Chris's Auto Repairs, open 7 days. This is another one of these faux ones by This Is My Costume, and that's going to be a feature in issue 2 of Better Letters magazine, Blag, which you can subscribe to at bl.ag. Now, oh look, we've got the sun on there. Let's see if there's a less dazzling. Oh, there we go. That's a nice one. So this is the view in December 2020. That's not so good actually. Let's try. Oh look, there you can actually go back to before. This is June 2008. I'll show you pictures of this as well. And then what about that one? May 2015. We can go a bit closer to it like this. So we're going to look at this bit of paint on wall to close out. So there's the before, well, after and before actually. I should probably flip those pictures, but This is a piece by Banksy. It was produced in the early 2000s for the music group Blur, and the picture itself is a parody of the royal family on the balcony of Buckingham Palace waving at the hoi polloi below. Now, this was one of the ones that was, well, it was nearly blackwashed out in the Hackney Council anti-graffiti drive. It's not clear if they were trying to eliminate that sort of silver coloured graffiti below or the piece in its entirety, but ultimately the owner of the building protested and got them to stop, and fortunately it left the most pertinent, important bit more or less intact in the middle. And I suppose it just brings back these issues that we had at the beginning about, what should and shouldn't be protected in the public realm. And, these arguments can apply equally to street art, to graffiti, and to ghost signs. I'm not a massive lobbyist. I don't write letters to councillors. I don't go and attend meetings. I don't wave placards. My general philosophy is that actually the people that seem most influential when it comes to ghost signs are the owners of the buildings, and if they can be convinced that the sign adds rather than detracts from the value of their building, they'll keep it. And so what we collectively need to do is to share these signs, to talk about them, to let people understand the history of them. And so that's what things like this event, the book, my tours, every time I get invited to go onto a radio show or a TV program, write an article, all of that gradually begins to permeate into the public consciousness, and one by one property owners will, I think and I hope, keep the signs. So there is the book. That's probably had the biggest recent impact. I'm just going to check. I did say at the beginning, didn't I, that I might check my messages, but I have my social medias, but I haven't really been doing that. I'm going to just see if there's anybody has sent me any questions via either the ghost signs or the better letters. No, nobody's done that, so that's fine. So that's really it. Here you can find all of my social media stuff at Mr. Ghost Signs on Instagram, at Ghost Signs on Twitter and the web. And thank you for taking part. I'd love some feedback. Please do send me feedback, because this is kind of a new way of me doing the event. I would like it to be more interactive. I could do webinar mode in Zoom, for example, and then we could have much more of a discursive thing. But I just wanted to test what it's like doing it as a live stream through YouTube. So so thank you. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and come back to face and just do a couple of final plugs. So that's the book, Ghost Signs: A London Story. Support your local bookshop. Order it via the ISBN. You can find that at ghostsigns.co.uk/book, or just search Ghost Signs book or Ghost Signs: A London Story. That'll come up. And this has been all part of my my work on Blag, which is Better Letters magazine. Next issue goes to print next week, and we'll have another Ghost Signs Corner and Ye Old Sign Shop. It's 64 pages with 0 advertising inside, so it's just signs. Issue 1 had these crazy lettered skulls from Austria, so it kind of takes a sort of quite irreverent look at the medium. This was a cool one from Good Looking Studio in Poland, a wall that becomes, you see a picture in it under black light at night. So subscribe to this. The print subscriptions are obviously paid for, but you can get the free emails via bl.ag. So over and out, and send me any comments or questions by social media. On Twitter, do at Ghost Signs, or on Instagram can be at Mr. Ghost Signs or at Better Letters. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your